Hey folks, thanks for watching my monologues. In case you haven't heard, I'm told there's an election coming up pretty soon. In some areas, there's a lot of violence and civil unrest. If you're in the market for personal protection for yourself or your family, I'd encourage you to visit Guns Etc. Guns Etc. is 10,200 square feet, and they have product. And they're getting new product all the time. They'll work with you to get the exact type of protection that fits your needs. Stop by their store in Mesa or visit gunsetcetera.com, where you'll have access to over $400 million worth of firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriot's YouTube channel. Welcome back and happy Friday, September 18th, 2020. Yesterday on Constitution Day, the president said he will, quote, soon sign an executive order establishing a national commission to promote patriotic education. It will be called the 1776 Commission. It will encourage our educators to teach our children about the miracle of American history and make plans to honor the 250th anniversary of our founding. Think of that, he said, 250 years. I also signed an executive order, he said, to establish the National Garden of American Heroes, a vast outdoor park that will feature the statues of the greatest Americans who have ever lived, close quote. This comes at a time when the mayor of Washington, D.C. has established a commission, her own commission, that has recommended the taking down of monuments in the D.C. area, and if not removing, relocating and contextualizing them, including the Washington and Jefferson monuments. One wonders how we could possibly have erased racism in law with the Civil Rights Act, with the Jefferson Memorial being where it was and what it was. One wonders how we could have fought and won a civil war and enacted the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, never mind also the Civil Rights Act, with the Washington Monument being where it was and what it was. What rioters were not able to accomplish, as Stanley Kurtz points out, elected and appointed officials will. And what is that accomplishment? The distortion and removal of our history. Now, we can maybe understand why Nancy Pelosi could finally, and this week for the first time, why she could finally denounce riots. She did so yesterday. Here is what she said in response to a Republican House member, quote, "Where are you when you are talking about violence, this or that?" he asked. Well, we're there. We support peaceful demonstrations. We participate in them. They are part of the essence of our democracy. That does not include looting, starting fires, or rioting. They should be prosecuted. That is lawlessness, close quote. Really? You've been there, Nancy? I ask because 2 months ago, when you were asked about the destruction of a statue of Christopher Columbus in a riot in your own hometown, you responded, quote, "People will do what people will do." This would be the same Nancy Pelosi who denounced federal agents deployed to protect federal property from rioters as stormtroopers, to invoke, as the left almost always does with this presidency, Nazi imagery. I guess this rewriting of the past doesn't have to go back 244 years. It can go back to July. Now, when President Trump announced the 1776 Commission yesterday, all sorts of criticism followed. My two favorites were from, of course, two academics. One of them said, quote, "What business does the federal government have in our schools?" Close quote. The other was from Ibram X. Kendi, who wrote, quote, "They don't plan to radically change what people hate. They plan to hate the people that want radical change." Close quote. To the first question, what business does the federal government have in our schools? I would only ask if the left wants the federal government out of education. Is that what they're asking? That would be an interesting new change of heart and mind. I suppose it might start with defunding not the police, a traditional state and local constitutional function of the states, but the U.S. Department of Education. I suppose it even forces us to ask what business the federal government has in school desegregation. Of course, that would be an absurdity based on the federal government's traditional role, of course, in desegregation under the 14th Amendment. The left remembers the 14th Amendment, don't they? That would be the amendment that was passed after the successful conclusion of the Civil War, which the Union and Lincoln, based on the words and philosophy of the Declaration of Independence, won. To listen to the left today, you'd think the Confederacy won. Perhaps that's why they don't think through the very implications of the nonsense they propagate. Of course, it's the federal government's role to be engaged in desegregation, and of course, because of the history, the very history they, the left, denies, which is why they can say absurd things about the federal government and its various roles now when it's under Donald Trump. Don't get me wrong. I think the federal role in education should be reduced, but it's the left that usually, I guess so long as it's not under Donald Trump, it's the left that usually wants it expanded. But what Donald Trump said about a 1776 commission is not a federal mandate. What he said, to quote again, was he would encourage our educators to teach our children about the miracle of American history. Encourage. And this itself comes from a pedigree the left ignores or would rather have us forget, which is from one of the organic laws of the United States, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. But of course, that's a year, 1787, the left despises also. Nevertheless, the Northwest Ordinance was a law, the law that empowered and determined how the United States would and could expand into areas that would become the states of Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Illinois. One might call them even battleground states. Anyway, education was not a small part of this organic law in the Northwest Ordinance. It famously stated, and states today as still one of our organic laws, quote, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged, close quote. There's that interesting word, isn't it? Encouraged. It's also important to note, to remind, that slavery was outlawed in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 as well. You know, the first thing the left tells us was part and parcel of our founding and our founding fathers. Which gets me to Ibram X. Kendi's absurd argument. Quote, they don't plan to radically change what people hate. They plan to hate the people that want radical change, close quote. This is the same professor at Boston University who recently said, quote, in order to truly be anti-racist, you also have to truly be anti-capitalist, close quote. I don't think any of us hate people. I do think we hate and should hate Marxism. Not only has it been responsible for millions, hundreds of millions, immiseration and crushing poverty, but the deaths of over 100 million people in order to continually try to make it work via the barrel of a gun or the bars of a prison or the misuse of psychiatry. As for trying to change what people hate, yes, of course we radically tried to change what people hate. Kendi means racism and slavery, and we do too. We thought it pretty radical to found our country, after all, on the proposition that all people were created equal. Martin Luther King Jr. knew how radical a proposition that was. Why doesn't Professor Kendi? Reverend King, in one of his most famous writings, The Letter from a Birmingham Jail, wrote this, quote, my approach has been condemned as extremist and extreme. But though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel? I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise, so help me God. And John Bunyan, I will stay in jail till the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience. And Abraham Lincoln, this nation cannot survive, half slave and half free. And, still quoting Martin Luther King, Thomas Jefferson, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, King kept writing, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? But there Professor Candy stands, with millions of dollars granted to him by the likes of Jack Dorsey, promoting Marxism and writing, as he also wrote in response to Donald Trump's commission, quote, "What Trump calls patriotic education is racist education," close quote. That pretty much sums up the moment we are now in. Patriotism equals racism. It's not new. We heard it from Malcolm X. We've heard it from Louis Farrakhan. We heard it from Leonard Jeffries. We heard it from Roy Churchill. We've heard it from Jeremiah Wright. And racism, the charge of it, not just of a person, but of a whole country, founded on the proposition of equality that took another war to concretize or reify, is the generic term for any kind of false consciousness, as Marxists would have it. What a misfortune that these Marxists never discuss or confront the racism of Karl Marx, racism against Mexicans, racism against blacks, and of course the deep-running anti-Semitism from labeling Jews as the product of entrails to arguing their God is truly not theistic, but money. Maybe we can understand a little better now why so much of the left is so anti-Semitic. It's all about the Benjamins, baby. That's how Ilhan Omar put it, putting Karl Marx's words into a more modern parlance. Benjamins, of course, referring to $100 bills with Benjamin Franklin's face on them. But what Marx had to say about what we would traditionally think of as minorities, Hispanics, Jews, blacks, has simply been suppressed or ignored by the followers of Marx. I understand why. When you rely on the philosophy of Marx to attack, condemn, and vilify a system of equality and freedom, and you ascribe, allege, and attribute racism as the basis for your attack, you can't show the much worse racism of your own Godhead. I worry greatly about all of this, greatly. I worry greatly about the power of bad ideas, wrong ideas, inimical ideas. For it turns out they may be more easily deployed in taking down what America stands for and has stood for than the physical destruction of the statues that were erected to honor and memorialize those ideas. As Charles Kessler put it, quote, "It may be all too easy to defile the ideas that gave rise to the vast and soaring memorials to our country and to this vast and beneficent country. It may be all too easy and more easy than it is to destroy the monuments themselves. Turns out, to propagandize, you have to erase and distort history. And there are a lot of ways to do that. We've borne witness to a lot of them recently and ignored too many in our recent past. It is harder to build than tear down and destroy. It may even be harder to maintain and preserve than to tear down and destroy. But that, Nancy Pelosi, is truly what Benjamin Franklin meant when he told us what we created yesterday 233 years ago, when he said we have a republic if we can keep it. Nancy Pelosi threw that phrase of Franklin's around an awful lot during impeachment. But the way she used it wasn't what Franklin was talking about. He was talking about preserving the idea and tablets of our founding. The left, however, knows exactly what it is doing, and doing in opposing this president's commission to promote patriotic education. It's not racist, and it shouldn't be controversial. It's the opposite of racism, and should lead to more harmony and unity. But of course, to revolutionaries, harmony and unity are what need to be disrupted and exploited. And I give you the crisis industrial complex as part and parcel of that. There are a lot of ways they do this. We are watching them. We have one main and important task: to stop it. I'm Seth Liebson. We'll be right back.